Picture yourself driving home from work.
Yeah.
Or maybe it is late at night, the house is completely quiet and you are just mindlessly scrolling through your phone.
We all do that.
Right. And you see yet another story. Another piece of news about an artificial intelligence model generating 50-page corporate reports or answering incredibly complex customer support emails or, even writing fully functional software code in a matter of seconds.
It is everywhere right now.
It really is. And as you sit there in the glow of the screen, a question naturally drifts into your mind. It is a simple, quietly practical question. If you keep doing your job exactly the same way for the next 10 years, will it still exist?
That happens to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And what is really interesting is how the collective tone of that question has evolved. Just a few years ago, asking if your job would exist felt like speculative science fiction.
Like it was alarmist.
Exactly. It sounded totally dramatic now. Now it just sounds like a very practical reality we're all trying to navigate on a random Tuesday afternoon.
Welcome to TalkKast. I think we just need a gentle grounding moment here.
That makes perfect sense.
Because the goal of this conversation is really to help make sense of this massive shift. Work rarely vanishes like a light switching off.
Right. It is much more subtle.
Exactly. Instead, it slowly changes shape. So today we want to offer a clearer way to understand how these tasks shift and what remains inherently valuable.
I get what you mean. The fundamental misunderstanding about this massive wave of automation is the timeline and the method.
How so?
Well, people have this cinematic mental image. They think the AI arrives at the corporate office on a Monday morning, hands you a cardboard box for your desk plants, and replaces an entire profession in one single move.
Like a robot wearing a suit.
Yeah, exactly. But that is simply not how technology integrates into the labor market. It enters through tasks.
Wait, let me push back on that right away. Because we all know people who have been laid off or, we see companies announcing hiring freezes, specifically citing new automation tools.
That is true.
So for the person who just lost their position, it absolutely feels like an overnight erasure. How do you separate the job from the task when the outcome feels the same to the worker?
That is a crucial distinction. And the pain of those layoffs is very real. But if we look at the actual mechanism of what is happening inside those companies, they didn't buy a robot that holds the title of junior marketing analyst.
Right, they just bought a software subscription.
Exactly. They bought software that can execute the workflow of pulling a weekly analytics report, drafting a summary, and emailing it to the team. The technology didn't look at the job title. It looked at the workflow.
It absorbed the tasks.
Yes, it absorbed the repetitive email you send every Tuesday morning. It absorbed the routine data cleanup, the predictable spreadsheet summary, and that internal status report that takes 3 hours to format.
The report nobody actually wanted to read anyway.
We all know that one.
I know that one intimately.
And when you frame it that way, it entirely changes our perspective on the future. The real question we should be asking isn't which jobs will disappear. The much more accurate, actionable question is which parts of my job can be automated and which parts still absolutely require a human being.
That makes so much sense, but I feel like it forces us to elevate our understanding of what this technology actually is.
Definitely.
We all know the systems can spit out boilerplate code or draft a basic email, but why? What is happening under the hood that makes office work so specifically vulnerable right now?
Well, to understand that, you have to look at the architecture of these large language models. They are, at their core, incredibly sophisticated prediction engines.
So they just guess the next word.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
But they are masterful at spotting patterns in massive amounts of information. Far more information than a human could ever hold in their working memory.
Right.
So a process has clear boundaries, a recognizable pattern, and a predictable outcome. The system can map it and replicate it.
So anything governed by rules.
Exactly. And think about how much of the modern white-collar workday is just following unspoken rules.
A lot of it.
If you are taking information from one database, ensuring it fits a certain formatting standard, and pasting it into another document, you are functioning like a biological algorithm.
Wow. Biological algorithm. That is bleak but accurate.
It is. You're doing pattern recognition and execution. And an actual digital algorithm will eventually do that faster, cheaper, and without needing a lunch break.
I find that to be such a fascinating flip of the historical script.
How do you mean?
Well, if you look back at earlier waves of automation, like the Industrial Revolution or the introduction of robotics on automotive assembly lines in the 20th century, the assumption was always that physical, manual, or low-skill work was at the absolute highest risk.
That actually makes sense when you look at history.
Right. We were practically conditioned to believe that working with your hands meant you were vulnerable, and working at a desk meant you were safe.
But the pattern is entirely inverted. The historical precedent taught us that machines replace muscles. The steam engine replaced the horse. The robotic arm replaced the welder. But this new wave of technology is touching non-routine cognitive work.
It is going after the office jobs.
Yes, it is touching language-heavy, office-based environments. White-collar jobs are surprisingly much more exposed than people expected.
Because so much of white-collar work is just moving symbols around on a screen.
Exactly. It is interesting. We touched on some of these macroeconomic shifts when we talked about will AI replace jobs, but looking at it strictly task by task makes the reality so much clearer.
It strips away the panic and leaves you with a practical audit.
It really demystifies the whole process. It tells us that not every office job is doomed, but the parts of office work that are clear, repeatable, and measurable are incredibly vulnerable.
Give me an example of that.
Think about a routine customer support role. Out of 1,000 customer emails, maybe 800 of them are essentially the same 3 questions asked in slightly different ways.
Like, where is my package?
Right. Where's my package? How do I reset my password? Why was I charged twice?
And the required responses to those 800 emails are entirely standard. You do not need a unique philosophical worldview to explain a password reset.
Right. And it extends to content creation, too. Basic content production is highly exposed when the output is formulaic.
Like what kind of content?
Short product descriptions for e-commerce sites, simple ad copy, generic social media posts. If the work does not require a unique point of view, it is just generating a predictable sequence of words.
Okay, I hear you on the vulnerability of structured, predictable tasks. So if that is the danger zone, it seems like looking at what the technology actually struggles with gives us the perfect map for what is going to survive.
That is the exact right way to approach it.
So where do the algorithms completely fall apart?
To understand what will survive, you just look at the other side of the equation. These systems are incredibly powerful inside a clean digital sandbox, but they are remarkably weak in situations that are messy, physical, ambiguous, or deeply human.
I love the word messy here, because human life is inherently messy. We do not operate in a clean digital space with perfectly labeled variables.
We absolutely do not. Technology struggles the moment the environment changes in real time.
Right.
It struggles when there is incomplete information, which, let's face it, in the real world is almost always the case.
Always.
It hesitates when the consequences of getting a decision wrong are incredibly serious. And most importantly, it fails when tacit knowledge matters more than the official rules.
Tacit knowledge. Let's unpack that. Are you talking about the kind of knowledge you cannot easily write down in an instruction manual?
That is the exact definition. It is the know-how versus the know-what.
So how does that play out in a real-world environment? Because healthcare seems like a perfect lens for this.
Healthcare is the ultimate example. Think about a nurse.
Okay.
A nurse is not just a biological data processor. They aren't just looking at a chart, seeing a temperature of 101 degrees and dispensing medication based on a rigid flow chart.
Right. There is so much more going on.
Exactly. A good nurse walks into a hospital room and instantly reads the entire environment. They notice the subtle tension in someone's face. They hear the specific, strained tone of voice.
They catch that exact moment a patient says, "I am fine," but they are gripping the bed sheets and clearly terrified.
Yes.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. We already have AI diagnostic tools that can read an MRI scan or track vital signs with statistical accuracy that outperforms human doctors.
They do.
So if the machine is objectively better at the data processing part of medicine, won't hospital administrators eventually just mandate the tech and reduce the nursing staff to cut costs?
That is a very valid concern, and we will definitely see hospital administrators try to optimize workflows, but you have to separate diagnosis from care.
I see.
The AI might be able to read the vital signs perfectly, might flag a subtle anomaly on an X-ray faster than a radiologist, but it cannot offer the physical reassurance of a hand on a shoulder that actually lowers a patient's heart rate. It cannot convince a stubborn, frightened patient to actually take their medication.
That makes sense. The AI can provide the output, but the human provides the compliance and the trust.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People do not just want a medical output, they deeply want another human being to witness their experience and care for them. Healing is a deeply social and psychological process, not just a chemical one.
You see the exact same dynamic in teaching.
Oh, absolutely.
A teacher is not just a mechanism for delivering information into a student's brain. If that were true, we could have replaced teachers with encyclopedias a century
Or
ago,
search engines 20 years ago.
or tablets 5 years ago.
And we have seen how poorly distance learning and purely screen-based education went for a lot of students.
Right, because a good teacher stands in front of a room and reads the collective energy. They see when a classroom is drifting.
They notice when one specific student is quietly disengaged.
Yes, not because the material is too hard, but because something is happening at home.
And they recognize the difference between a student who has merely memorized the vocabulary words to pass the test and a student who actually understands the underlying concept.
So true.
The teacher adjusts their metaphor in real time based on a confused look in the third row. That is real-time environmental adaptation. It requires deep emotional intelligence and situational awareness.
So we have these highly emotional, highly social rules. They survive because they are messy and rely on tacit knowledge.
Right.
But what about the physical world? We mentioned earlier that manual labor was the target of past automation, but that the pattern flipped. Why is physical work so resilient to artificial intelligence?
This brings us to a concept known in robotics as Moravec's paradox.
Okay, tell me more.
Hans Moravec, a robotics researcher, observed something fascinating back in the 1980s. He noted that it is incredibly easy to make computers exhibit adult-level performance on intelligence tests or playing checkers.
But hard to make them walk.
Exactly. It is difficult or entirely impossible to give them the skills of a one-year-old when it comes to perception and mobility.
High-level reasoning requires very little computation, but low-level sensory-motor skills require enormous computational resources.
That is it exactly. Writing an essay on Shakespeare is computationally easy for an AI. Walking up a flight of stairs, recognizing a doorknob, and turning it is computationally monumental.
Wow.
So when you look at skilled physical trades, plumbers, electricians, builders, repair specialists, there is this lingering misconception that these are low-tech or simple jobs.
They aren't.
They aren't at all. They are highly technical, but they happen in entirely unpredictable environments.
I was thinking exactly about this when a pipe burst in my basement last winter.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the plumber didn't walk into a pristine, controlled laboratory environment. My basement is a unique, messy puzzle.
Exactly. Every single house is different. One house has incredibly poor access under the sink. Another house has pipes that were installed in the 1920s and do not match any modern building codes.
Right, and another house has hidden water damage behind a wall that you only discover once you physically tear the drywall down. The work requires intense physical improvisation.
It requires moving your body through awkward spaces, diagnosing problems with incomplete visual information, and making small, critical judgment calls every few minutes.
It is like playing chess, but the board keeps changing size and the pieces are melting.
That is a brilliant way to put it. The real world is just too chaotic for a system that relies on standardized inputs.
A robot might be able to assemble a car perfectly on a factory floor because the factory floor is completely controlled.
Exactly. The lighting is perfect, the temperature is controlled, and the parts arrive at the exact millimeter they are expected.
But an icy street or a flooded basement or a crumbling brick wall.
That requires a level of human adaptability that robotics is nowhere near achieving.
So the messy physical world is safe, and the messy emotional world is safe. And that leads us to a vital concept that economists are talking about right now, complementarity.
Yes, complementarity.
What does that actually mean in practice?
It is the idea that the future isn't about technology replacing human intelligence, but complementing it. It is not just about raw computational horsepower. It is about judgment in context.
Judgment in context.
The overarching rule here is that the more human, the more uncertain, and the more trust-based a job is, the more durable it is against automation.
I really want to pause and explore that word, judgment, because introducing judgment brings up what looks like a massive contradiction to a lot of people.
How so?
Well, we just established that structured, predictable tasks are exposed and messy human tasks are safe.
Right.
But then we look at the creative industries. We see technology generating stunning images, writing catchy advertising slogans, composing music, and drafting essays all day long.
It is very true.
That feels like a direct threat to the most inherently human thing we do, which is creativity. How do you reconcile that?
That is the exact paradox people are wrestling with right now, and it is causing a massive amount of anxiety in the creative fields. It requires a really crucial nuance to understand what is actually happening. Look at creative roles. What survives isn't creativity as decoration. What survives is creativity as judgment.
Creativity as judgment. Break that down for me. How do you separate the two?
Think about the production side of creativity versus the strategic side. A generative system can instantly produce 50 different logo concepts for a new company.
Right.
It can generate 10 different marketing campaign ideas in 5 seconds. It's a phenomenal production engine. However, the system cannot tell you which of those 50 logos actually matches the brand's deeper unspoken identity. It cannot tell you which logo is going to feel relevant not just today, but 2 years from now when the cultural zeitgeist shifts.
I see. It can generate an infinite number of options, but it entirely lacks the contextual taste to make the final selection.
Exactly. It can give you the 10 campaign ideas, but it cannot decide which specific idea perfectly aligns with the current market psychology, the company's highly restrictive budget, the timing of a sensitive product launch, and the long-term corporate strategy.
So the generating part is easy now.
Generating the idea is no longer the bottleneck. Deciding which idea deserves to exist in the world is the actual valuable work.
But let me push back on that.
Go on.
If I am a CEO and my goal is just to cut costs and maximize shareholder value, why wouldn't I just fire my expensive creative director, use the AI to generate 1,000 logos, and just pick the one that looks good enough?
People will definitely try that.
Doesn't this still decimate the creative class, even if the AI lacks taste?
That is the harsh reality of the short-term market. We will absolutely see companies do exactly that. They will optimize for cheap production over strategic judgment.
Right, because it saves money today.
But what happens next? If a brand relies purely on automated good enough generation, their marketing rapidly reverts to the mean. It becomes generic.
Because everyone else is using the same tool.
Exactly. In a world where everyone has access to the exact same infinite content generator, the only way to stand out is through highly specific, deeply human curation and strategic risk-taking.
That makes me think of the difference between an assembly line worker making bricks and the architect who is deciding what kind of building is going to be constructed.
That is a great analogy.
If your entire job description is simply make 10 versions of this graphic as quickly as possible, or write 5 variations of this paragraph, you are operating like the bricklayer.
You are highly exposed.
But if your role is look at the cultural landscape, understand the client's deepest anxieties, and decide what we should build and why, you become the architect.
That is a very useful way to look at it. The production of the materials becomes commoditized, but the architectural vision becomes premium.
So the high-level thinkers are safe.
This is why senior designers, creative directors, founders, senior editors, and high-level strategists are much more likely to remain valuable than purely production-based creative roles. The shift in the creative economy is moving rapidly from creation to curation, from drafting to directing.
And I imagine that same principle of judgment applies far outside of the creative fields, especially when you factor in the concept of trust. We touched on trust earlier with the nurse, but it seems foundational to the survival of many high-stakes professions.
It is absolutely foundational. Think about law, finance, medical diagnosis, or executive leadership.
Okay.
In tense, high-stakes situations, human beings fundamentally want someone to be accountable.
Right. If I am facing a life-altering legal challenge or making a massive financial investment that represents my entire life savings, I do not just want an output from a machine.
Even if the machine is statistically 99% accurate.
Exactly. I want a person I can look in the eye.
You want someone you can question. You want someone who can explain their reasoning to you in plain, empathetic language.
Someone who gets it.
Yes, someone who understands the complex politics of the situation, the personalities of the opposing counsel, the subtle trade-offs, and the immense stakes involved. Trust simply does not transfer automatically from a person to a piece of software.
Because you cannot sue an algorithm if it ruins your life. You cannot look a server rack in the eye and ask, are you absolutely sure this is the right path for my family?
That is the core of it. Accountability is a distinctly human burden. In many of these high-trust professions, technology will actually make human judgment more important, not less.
Because there's so much more data to sort through.
Right. The technology will provide vast amounts of data, predictive models, and strategic options. But someone still has to sit at the head of the table and decide what to accept, what to reject, and crucially, what risk they're willing to personally carry on behalf of the client.
That is a powerful way to look at it. The burden of risk remains with us.
It does.
And this brings us to what might be the single biggest nuance that people miss when they panic about the future of work. We keep talking about whether a job remains or disappears.
Right.
But the reality is that a job remaining does not mean the way we do the job remains the same.
That is the absolute center of this entire macroeconomic shift. Most jobs aren't going to be erased. They are going to be radically reconfigured. It is transformation, not termination.
Let's ground that in some specific professions to see how that transformation actually plays out.
Okay.
What does that reconfiguration look like for, say, a software programmer? Because we hear constantly in the news and from tech executives themselves that coding is going to be entirely automated and computer science degrees are suddenly worthless.
A programmer will absolutely still exist in 10 years, but the nature of their Tuesday afternoon is going to look completely different.
How so?
Currently, a lot of a junior programmer's time is spent typing out lines of code from scratch, hunting down minor syntax errors, and building standard boilerplate components for a login page or a database connection.
Right, the tedious stuff.
In the future, that day-to-day work shifts entirely. The system writes the bulk of the initial code. The human programmer becomes an orchestrator.
So they move up a level in abstraction, they stop being the bricklayer.
Precisely. They spend their time reviewing the code the system generated, debugging complex logical errors that the system cannot grasp, validating the security of the application to ensure it cannot be hacked, and engaging in high-level system architecture.
They become editors.
Yes, they are thinking about how the entire ecosystem of the software fits together to solve a business problem, rather than typing every single line of the foundation. They go from being a writer of code to an editor and manager of code.
And that writer-to-editor transition applies literally to actual writers as well.
Absolutely.
The writer will still exist, but the writer who only knows how to produce a slow, adequate first draft is going to face immense pressure.
They will?
The writer who thrives will be the one who uses the technology to generate that messy, foundational first draft instantly.
Right.
And then uses their uniquely human skills to shape the ideas, sharpen the editing, inject original voice, nuance, and humor, and intelligently guide the technology to a polished final product.
Yes. The baseline of what is considered acceptable work is going to rise dramatically.
Because the floor is higher now.
Exactly. Because if everyone has an AI that can write a perfectly competent, grammatically correct, incredibly boring B- essay, then B- work is no longer commercially viable. You have to be an A+ editor to survive.
Let's look at a doctor as another example of this reconfiguration. How does their Tuesday afternoon change?
A doctor will still exist, of course, but the way they spend their 15 minutes with the patient will transform.
In what way?
Right now, a doctor spends a significant portion of that appointment staring at a screen, typing notes into an electronic health record, and manually cross-referencing symptoms.
It is an enormous clerical burden.
It is an enormous clerical burden that leads to massive burnout.
I know exactly what you mean. You are sitting in the exam room trying to explain a vulnerable health issue, and the doctor is facing the laptop, typing furiously, not making eye contact.
Exactly. In a reconfigured role, the system listens to the conversation in real time.
Just running in the background.
Right. It instantly drafts the clinical notes, updates the medical record, and quietly suggests a triage support plan based on the latest medical literature.
Wow.
This completely frees the doctor from the clerical burden. They can actually turn their chair around, look the patient in the eye, and focus entirely on communication, empathy, and the nuanced interpretation of the symptoms.
That sounds like a remarkably positive shift for the patient experience. It brings the humanity back into the room.
It really does.
But I want to pause and reflect on the emotional weight of what you are describing for the worker.
Okay.
Because there is a massive psychological difference between being told your entire job is disappearing and being told 30% of your current daily tasks are disappearing.
There is a huge difference.
On paper, the second scenario sounds like a relief. But in reality, having 30% of your tasks vanish still completely changes your professional life, and often not for the better.
It completely changes your life, and it is entirely valid to feel anxiety about that. Because when 30% of the tasks are automated, the expectations from management do not just stay the same. They do not just say, great, go home early on Thursday. Productivity expectations rise. The company might reduce entry-level openings because the system is now doing the work that juniors used to do, which breaks the training pipeline for the next generation. Teams might get compressed.
And it creates this incredible disparity between workers within the same company.
How do you mean?
Well, you will have some people who Lean in, learn to orchestrate the new tools, and become 10 times more productive.
Right.
And you will have others who stubbornly cling to the old methods, refuse to adapt, and rapidly fall
Yeah,
behind.
that is the real hazard for the individual. The greatest risk to your career is not the artificial intelligence itself. The greatest risk is allowing yourself to become easy to substitute. You do not lose your value because a machine suddenly becomes conscious or magical. You become vulnerable because too much of your professional value was anchored in tasks that are incredibly easy to copy, speed up, or standardize.
That is a very sobering thought. If your entire sense of professional worth is tied up in pushing information between two different software systems or writing standard weekly summaries that follow the exact same template every time,
The ground beneath you is incredibly unstable.
it is unstable. The labor market isn't necessarily going to punish job titles first. It is going to punish task-based sameness.
Exactly.
If you are doing the exact same thing, the exact same way every single day, the market will eventually find a cheaper, faster way to execute that sequence of events.
It is inevitable.
So this leads us to the most urgent question, the practical application of all this theory. How do you navigate this?
That is the key.
If you are listening to this on your commute or sitting at your desk, how do you make sure you aren't just doing the same task the same way? How do you actively adapt to this hybrid future?
The very first practical shift is a profound change in perspective. You have to stop looking at your career at the macro level of your profession
Okay.
and start auditing your work at the micro level of your tasks.
So break it down.
Exactly. Don't just ask, is marketing safe or is accounting safe? Look at your calendar for the past week. Look at every single hour. Ask yourself, which of these hours were spent on routine, predictable execution?
And which of these hours were spent interpreting messy situations, guiding a colleague, building trust with a client, or solving a truly unusual problem?
Exactly. That is a fantastic exercise. You are essentially separating your week into the machine hours and the human hours.
Machine hours and human hours, like that.
And once you identify the machine hours, the second step is to aggressively learn the tools that can automate them.
You have to learn to use the technology before your industry forces you to.
Yes, not because the technology is perfect or because it is the answer to everything, but because the real competition in the labor market isn't going to be human versus machine.
It is going to be a human using better tools versus a human using no tools at all.
That is exactly right. The person who knows how to leverage the system to do their routine, predictable work in 1 hour instead of 5 now has 4 extra hours.
4 extra hours to dedicate to the complex, high-judgment, trust-building work that actually secures their position in the company.
Right.
And that highlights a really beautiful irony in all of this.
What is that?
Well, we are talking about the most advanced, mathematically complex technological shift in a generation.
Yes.
But as the technology gets better and more capable, it is actually the least flashy, most ancient human qualities that are skyrocketing in value.
That is the great paradox of our time. When people think about future-proofing their careers, they immediately panic and think they need to go back to school to learn advanced coding or machine learning or data science.
Right. Everyone thinks they need to be a programmer now.
And yes, digital fluency is important. You need to understand how to interact with the systems. But the skills that truly separate you from the algorithm are deeply fundamentally human.
Let's go through those human skills because they are so critical to name. Analytical thinking becomes paramount.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if the system can generate 100 pages of research in 3 seconds, somebody with a sharp, critical mind still has to sit down and judge whether that output actually makes sense.
Right, or if it's completely hallucinated nonsense.
Exactly. Analytical thinking is your primary defense against confidently delivered bad information.
Then there is communication. We are drowning in information, but we are starving for meaning.
That is a great way to put it.
A system can hand a client a spreadsheet with 10,000 highly accurate data points. A human being looks a client in the eye and says, here is the story this data is telling us, and here is why you should care.
People need meaning, and meaning is transferred through human communication.
Right.
And adaptability. The tools are going to change every 6 months. The workflows are going to be rewritten constantly.
It is nonstop.
The ability to look at a shifting, unstable landscape and not freeze, but instead say, okay, the rules just changed. What is the new optimal path? That is a premium skill.
It is. Add to that emotional intelligence and leadership. Because at the end of the day, teams, clients, patients, students, and customers are still messy, emotional human beings. Uncertainty does not manage itself. When a project goes wrong, when a deadline is missed, or when a market shifts unexpectedly, an algorithm cannot rally a demoralized team.
No, it takes human leadership to navigate fear, build consensus, and drive people forward.
Exactly.
The future really isn't purely technical. It is this fascinating hybrid. It is technological ability layered on top of deeply human capability.
That is the goal.
But I want to address the emotional reality of making that transition, because it is very easy for us to sit here with microphones and say, just be adaptable, just change your skills, just audit your calendar.
Right. It sounds simple on paper.
But work isn't just a paycheck. For so many people, work is their identity.
It is. It is identity, it is routine, it is structure, it is how people organize their entire lives.
It is how you introduce yourself at a dinner party. It is a way of answering the question, what do you do, without feeling completely lost in the world.
Yes.
So when people hear that their daily tasks are changing, what they are really hearing underneath that is something much more intimate and terrifying. They are hearing, what if the thing I built my entire life around stops making sense?
That fear is entirely understandable, and we have to validate it. Changing your professional identity is a grieving process.
It really is.
It is genuinely terrifying to let go of the expertise you spent 10, 20 years building. This is exactly why shallow reassurances from tech executives are so incredibly frustrating.
Oh, I agree.
Telling someone, do not worry, this disruption will create millions of brand new jobs we cannot even imagine yet, does not help a person who is sitting at their desk right now, wondering how they're going to pay their mortgage if their specific job evaporates.
New jobs will exist in 5 years does not put food on the table next month.
Right. But at the same time, total apocalyptic doom is not an honest reflection of the macroeconomic data either.
So what are we actually seeing?
We are not seeing a simple overnight collapse of human employment. What we are seeing is uneven pressure. Some tasks are automating incredibly fast. Some occupations are changing shape.
Some hiring patterns are softening.
And meanwhile, human-heavy sectors like healthcare, skilled trades, and complex project management are staying incredibly strong.
The change isn't going to hit every field equally or arrive at every company at the exact same speed. Which means fear alone is a terrible guide for the future. Fear paralyzes you. It makes you hide.
Exactly. Fear is not a good guide. But attention is.
Attention.
Paying close, unflinching attention to the reality of your specific daily work is your best navigation tool right now.
Just really looking at what you do.
Yes. Passive careers, the kind where you just put your head down, do exactly what you're told, and hope nothing changes, those are becoming fundamentally less safe.
You have to be proactive.
Remaining flexible in how you define your professional identity is no longer just a nice philosophy for a self-help book. It is a strict requirement of modern work.
That is a profound realization. It forces us to confront the fact that the future does not belong strictly to the coders who build the systems.
Right.
It does not belong strictly to the creative directors or strictly to the skilled tradespeople or strictly to the caregivers.
It belongs to the people who can combine their specific capability with an unwavering adaptability.
I love that.
It belongs to the individuals who can pick up these incredible new tools and wield them effectively without becoming tool-like themselves.
They understand that their core value is no longer tied to how perfectly they can execute a repeatable task. Their value is rooted in doing the things that remain inherently important when all the easy, repeatable parts get cheaper and faster.
Exactly. It is about judgment, empathy, trust, and connection.
That is the deepest shift underneath this entire conversation.
It really is.
And it leaves us with one final crucial thought to mull over.
What is that?
As you look at the landscape of your own career, the most important question isn't simply whether your job will still exist in 10 years.
No, it isn't.
The real question, the one that actually demands an answer, is whether you are willing to keep evolving alongside it.
I could not agree more.
Thanks for listening to TalkKast.